Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Kolloquium's presentation from the MIRACUM and DIFUTURE Kolloquium series. I would like to welcome Dr. Sabine Oesterle from Swiss Personalized Health Network. I assume that almost everybody in the round knows a little bit about SPHN, which is a corresponding project to the Medical Informatics Initiative in Switzerland. Sabine Oesterle is involved in this project, I believe, from the beginning. Is this correct?
Yes.
So she can give us an update today about the actual status of the SPHN network. If anybody after the presentation has questions, you can ask your questions in German, and she can ask in German as well. So just feel free to either ask in German or to ask in English. Okay, Sabine, it's yours.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for the presentation to present our work. And today what we would like to especially focus on is the Federated Clinical Routine Dataset. So what is that dataset and how did we actually build it? But before I start, maybe a few facts for Switzerland, because that will also help us to put some of the numbers in perspective. So Switzerland, quite a small country south of Germany, with a total population of 9 million people, so way smaller than Switzerland. It is a very federated system. So we have 26 cantons, where each canton has actually their own way of working, also their own legislation and all their own rules. So also when it comes, for example, to data protection or also the healthcare system. What makes it also very challenging is that we have 4 national languages, and that's also one of the facts why I'm giving that talk in English, because whenever everyone comes together, the common language is English. So actually, especially in the research sector, so that's why it's actually even sometimes you can say 5 languages, which we have to consider. When it comes to the healthcare landscape, we have 5 university hospitals in the main cities: Basel, Zurich, Bern, Lausanne, and Geneva. But then there is many smaller so-called cantonal hospitals, which are also providing healthcare services to the population. As I said before, very strong data protection. So we are not part of GDPR, but we have a kind of similar Swiss data protection law. And again, what is very special is actually that the cantons can be stricter in their data protection law than the federal one. So we see quite often a lot of the cantons which have actually stricter data protection rules, which makes it very hard when you work on the national level, because you have to take all the different legislations into account. And also when it comes to sharing and using health data, there's quite a lot of controls and very strict rules by the different cantons, but also by the hospitals. So SPHN, for those of you who don't know it, it's very similar to the Medical Informatics Initiative, where actually we work with the different partners in Switzerland which have something to do around medical research, medical data sharing. So you can see we work with a lot of the different hospitals, but also organizations like the Swiss Biobanking Platform, the Swiss Cancer Institute, or institutions like the Swiss National Science Foundation, and also the federal offices. As I say, hospitals are involved, and on top, what we have is a trusted research environment, which actually provides the compute capacities for the researchers to analyze their data. And actually, all of that national infrastructure is coordinated by the SAMW, the Swiss Academy of Medical Science, and the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics, where actually I'm hosted. So, as I say, there's a lot of activities ongoing in SPHN, but actually today I would like to focus on one project which we have, which is the SPHN Federated Clinical Routine Dataset, and that more or less resolved out of that question where it's like, which data is now available in SPHN? So SPHN had worked, I think by now it's the 9th years on the standardization, the data pipelines of bringing clinical routine data to researchers, but no, it was never visible because data was always shared for specific projects and was always certain subsets, and a lot of the work happened behind the scene. And this is actually one of the ideas which we wanted to address with that Federated Clinical Routine Dataset, where you can see is we have 6 hospitals involved. We have more hospitals in the network, but we started with these 6 to contribute to that Federated Clinical Routine Dataset. So you can see it's the 5 university hospitals, the cities which I told you before, plus the Children's Hospital in Zurich. And here comes already one of the first kind of different structures that in some university hospitals, actually the children's hospitals are included in the main hospitals. And in some cities like Zurich, actually they are separated institutions. And this is also one of the reasons why we see this Children's Hospital Zurich now. That doesn't mean we only have children's data from Zurich, because as I said, in some hospitals, it's actually included. So before we go into that data set and what it's all about, I would like to give you a small recap on our strategy and how are we preparing data. So this is actually the semantic interoperability framework, where the challenge we had was actually that we are working with real-world data. So quite often in many of our projects, we were combining real-world data with also other data, for example, from registries, from clinical studies. And this is really a very complex landscape with very different data which is available. As soon as we dive into the world of omics or biological data, actually this added another layer on top. And for this reason, actually, we choose the W3C standards, so RDF and OWL, to represent the data. However, within these standards, we focused heavily on using commonly known ontologies and standards. And I think also the 2 I would like to focus today most on the clinical routine side are SNOMED-CT and LOINC, which actually, when we started with SPHN, in most hospitals were actually even unknown 8 years ago. And this really enables us to speak the same language and have a semantic representation of that data. And actually this forms then a kind of knowledge graph in the end, which we can then analyze and really have a comprehensive view of the patient. So I think that most probably looks very familiar with for you. So what are we doing, or what are our hospital partners doing? They have actually the whole patient journey. The patient goes through different departments, different measurements are taken. Everything is stored in their own software solution in different kind of databases. And actually each hospital has now built up a so-called clinical data platform where all of that information is actually brought together and stored. And from this kind of platforms, we then actually extract the data in the common format, which actually then forms our knowledge graph. So the idea here is that we have a human and machine readable representation of the data. We try to push quite a lot of provenance and metadata into this knowledge graph to really be able to have all the details which are needed to understand, for example, a measurement in detail, and also to compare across hospitals. But as you all know, this is a very time-consuming and very hard work to really do this, to really collect all this information. And as I say, for some of the projects, not for the federated dataset, we actually then combine that data with data from other sources to enrich that data. So a few words on our knowledge graph and actually on the schema. So we have in total 201 SPHN concept defined. So this is the release of 2026. So a concept means this is some medical fact and which kind of properties, which metadata goes with that fact. All of these concepts are actually developed in a national alignment. So we have multiple working groups with which we elaborate these concepts and really see that these are actually aligned with all the partners, and also that we agree on which standards or which value sets to use. And we try to be very strict that we actually only define a meaning once, and that we actually then reuse these concepts in different kind of contexts. So currently our schema covers administrative items, it covers demographics, medication, procedures, diagnoses, measurements, vital signs. We also have metadata for imaging, so this is actually a quite new extensions. We have information on sample, on biobanks, if that information is available, because this is really also depending on how is the organization of the hospitals, where the biobank sits. And then we have a lot of special concepts, for example, for oncology, intensive care, or microbiology. We have quite some concepts on omics results and omics processing. So say this is not so relevant here for the clinical routine data, but more for the omics part, which we are also normally working on, and then actually all the work on data provenance. How are we technically doing it? So as I said, all hospitals have their clinical data platform, and from there we co-developed a kind of common tool which all hospitals have installed, which is called the SPHN connector. So the SPHN connector is a kind of data transformation pipelines which can accept data, for example, in CSV, in JSON, or also in table form, is then actually de-identifying the data, transforming it into RDF, and then actually also doing the kind of validation. And this data is then actually loaded at the hospitals in a triple store, from which we can actually then extract metadata. And since this metadata is actually not sensitive, we can actually analyze it, and that will be the results which I show you today, but then also make them explorable for everyone on the metadata catalog. And of course, with such a kind of setup, hospitals stay in full control of the data. As I said, the triple store is inside the hospitals. They still have the full control of with whom they then really share the data. So data can be now very easily explored, but the sharing is still in full control of the hospitals. The hospitals have the full ownership of the pipeline. So all the tool components are developed open source, and the hospital actually are deploying it. With that, they are also in full control of the security and the data privacy, because the data stays within the hospital boundaries. And it is very easy, or it's easier for them to do data updates. So if a patient came again to the hospital, or also, for example, if there's consent revocation happening, because if there's consent revocation, of course, we delete the patient out of the knowledge graph, and yeah, have that. So now let's dive into this federated clinical routine data set, or the metadata as we extracted it. So again, it is 6 hospitals. We included cases from 2018 to current, and actually all the patients which are in there have signed the broad consent. This was for us very important because, of course, these are the patients, or the data of the patients, which we can then also use in further research projects. So in total, we have around 800,000 patients included in this data set. And again, for my first slide, we have around 8 million of a total population. So this makes around 10% of the overall populations. So how many data elements do we have in this data set? So in total, we have around 12 billion triples. So 12 billion, a triple is the smallest kind of building block of a knowledge graph. So you can see that this is really a large data set, and really compares to one of the biggest triple stores we know. Also, we have around 6,500 different SNOMED-CT codes in that data set, and around 3,600 line codes. And here on the right, you can see this is like a graph representation, which you actually can even explore online. And the size of the bubble actually represents how many instances of it are in this data set. And what I'm quite proud of is actually that one of the biggest bubbles here is actually SNOMED-CT. So really meaning we have the most instances in that data set, which are SNOMED-CT. Unfortunately, I think that bubble is even bigger, which is date times. And then there is this string bubble, which I always would like to ignore, which is around the same size. But I think still we have really achieved quite a lot with that SNOMED-CT coding. So I think that is a huge achievement. But now let's look into more details. And I think one of the things is really like, what does this data set contain? And you can see here that the biggest portion of that data set is actually measurements. So meaning we have around 300 million instances of measurement. And that even we said we exclude the time series of measurements. So this is actually mostly even single measurements or smaller time series. We have not completely eliminated all time series, but there is no big PDMS data in, and still all the measurements really make up such a big part. Then the second biggest fraction is actually lab tests. And you can see here indicated that lab tests in our case are mostly in SNOMED CT, so mostly in LOINC. So this is the biggest fraction. But we have a smaller part also coded with SNOMED CT. This is mostly also on the microbiology side, where the research or the clinical expert actually identified SNOMED CT as the better standard compared to the LOINC. Then medications, also here, like a smaller amount, so substances, where we see, again, a mix between SNOMED and ATC. So both standards are actually used. We then have actually around 80 million specimens. They are now all coded in SNOMED CT, something which I think was also not present in the hospital before we started with SPHN. Then we have procedures. So here we see quite a large fraction of SNOMED CT and also CHOP, which is the local Swiss procedure classification. To say the SNOMED CT looks quite abandoned, however, these are quite, for example, like a lot of the measurement have a procedure how this measurement were taken. So again, it's not too much variety in different codes, and we will come to that later. So I think it's a bit of false friends seeing that it's looking like we were very far advanced in coding procedures in SNOMED, which I think we are not. And then we have diagnoses, which are mostly in ICD-10. We have a very, very small fraction of ortho for the rare diseases. I think it's around 1%. Then we have scores, of course, also coded in SNOMED CT. And actually, if you remember, we need to add up to 12 billion. There's still a lot of things missing. So for example, there's around 250 million instances of other SNOMED CT things. That can be medical devices, that can be qualifier values. So there's a lot of different things in there. So now I would like to dive a bit into the challenges, especially when it comes to these systems. So I think the first challenge which we see is data completeness. So I think we all know real-world data, clinical routine data is never complete because the patients had different treatments, and that's why we have different data available for them. But also when it comes to our concept, we see that we have things which are available in 6 hospitals, like administrations, medications, diagnosis, procedures, labs, also scores. But then we also see that there are things which are available in less hospitals, which are then being the more specific ones. And here, actually, we really hard work with the hospitals to really close that gap so that we can get all the things available in the different hospitals. And also to say there is a big fraction of concepts which are not used. Again, this has to do that our data schema is not only made for clinical routine data. So there's always some concepts which a hospital would never use because they were made for the omics. So I think that this bar here, the first one, is very high. That is very explainable. Similar when we go into the coding, so I would like to put a bit of light on all the work which was done when it comes to LOIN coding in SPHN. So here some results. So we have between 12 and 122 instances of LOIN codes in this federated dataset per hospital, and between 220 and 1,426 codes per hospital. So you see that hospitals are very differently advanced in these kind of coding efforts. And of course, what we can also see is that while the largest fraction of data instances goes towards the clinical chemistry, we can also see that these are actually the most codes used. But then when we go to number 2 of the most used instances, which is, for example, the hematology, you can see that this is actually, when it comes to how many codes there are, actually only number 5. And that, for example, allergy, where there's quite a lot of code, actually the fraction of data is very, very small. And this also, we further analyzed this. So how many hospitals are actually using the same codes and are also using or coding similar things? Because as I say, we have done a lot, but we are still in some hospitals more at the start. So you can see here that actually when it's violet, the dark violet means that this code only appears in one hospital, while if we are going down to the yellow means actually this code is available in all hospitals. And I think this plot nicely shows that there's still quite a lot of work to do to really code everything in a kind of similar way. And I think also really that we can use this data now to really set priorities and to actually also do alignment in how to do the codings. We see a very similar picture for SNOMED CT. Also here it's between 17 and 56 million instances across the hospitals and around 700 to 3,000 different codes per hospitals. The biggest fraction on the instance side is the clinical findings, goes along a lot with the measurements, procedures and qualifier values, and then specimens. Well, when we look in where are the different codes lying, actually we see that the biggest fraction is substances or organism or even body structure. So here in this plot, we really see, that more codes doesn't mean more data. And also here, a similar picture when it comes to the overlap across hospitals. So we see that some things like body structures are not yet coded in all hospitals. Similar, for example, physical objects are maximal like coded in 3 hospitals. Then the next data challenge, or the next challenge, is the data quality. So I think I have shown you the data is never complete. Not all concepts are represented. We also see quite a lot of other challenges in the data, and I think it's a very hard way to fix these, and we are heavily working on it. So we observed things like that the start date is before the end date, that we see very extreme values, which actually physiological cannot be true. We also see that in some hospitals there's suddenly codes existing which should not exist, because officially they don't exist, either because there was a typo made when entering, or sometimes someone invented local extension and no one knows anymore what they mean. We also were seeing very extreme patients, which, for example, patients who had 2 million drug prescriptions, which is really something, again, which is not possible, but which really challenge all your data pipelines, because that's where your data pipelines will break. We have seen a lot that data is reported in multiple time zones, so we have to be careful about, do we mean Central European time, or also are we considering summer or winter time, because we really saw like shifts in the dates by 1 or 2 hours. There's still a very big fractions of free text, so not coded data, and also we often miss the kind of code information which comes with that data. And my slides not advancing. Yeah, this is very hard work and a lot of manual work, which all the hospitals are now putting a lot of effort in to fix that in a retrospective way. But in general, I think we need to invest in fixing these things in a prospective way. So the federated clinical routine data, and how can you explore it? As I said, it is represented in our metadata catalog. So our metadata catalog is available under this URI, which you see here on the bottom. It's represented in HealthDCAT, so the standard of the European health data space, and so-called void statistics, so vocabulary of interlinked data sets. So we see here descriptive metadata in HealthDCAT format, but then we can actually explore, for example, all the concepts, how many instances there are, how many instances there are per patient, min, max, and also all the kind of SNOMED, LOINC, ICD-10, all the codes, how often do they appear, all these kind of frequencies. you can also explore that in a visual way. So there's a component which is called schema scope, which shows you the graph, and you can again see and navigate the graph in a visual way to see which data is available here. And then I think I'm already a bit over time, so I'm speeding up. So what we have actually since Friday is actually also we have a Sparkle endpoint, which enables you to also do sparkles on it. So you can ask the Sparkle endpoint things like, for example, which SPHN measurements concepts are available in Fed data, and you can start using the kind of hierarchical structure of our schema, but also, for example, of SNOMED-CT to do your queries. So this is one query. Or another query, which we have just designed, is like how many hospitals are delivering the SOFA score. Again, SOFA score is something we code in SNOMED-CT. And there you see that this is around 4 hospitals. And what is quite nice, because we are using a Sparkle endpoint, we can do federation, meaning we actually did the first federated queries across our metadata catalog and our colleagues in the Netherlands, the Helferij, where we, for example, then ask, this is now not related to the Fed dataset anymore, but are there patients datasets related to pediatrics in these initiatives? And then you can see that you get results actually of both systems. And I think with that, I go very fast. I don't know where it took so much time. So now our next step is, of course, we can now already query metadata. So we have all the kind of statistics, of concepts, of codes used in that data set. But of course, you also want to have the combinatoric. And this is actually what we now work on, so that actually we have a system on top of that federated data set, which will allow feasibility studies and data exploration. However, again, this will be only available after contractual negotiation. So again, the metadata you can explore, it's completely free on the web, but then on the data side, there will be more restrictions. And yeah, we have 3 use cases currently in the pipeline. One is feasibility studies. How many patients do we have with certain combinatoric features? Value distribution, for example, for lab values for certain conditions, like female patients with diabetes, what is their glucose distribution? Or actually means and standard derivation of certain quantitative values. And again, all of these use cases are anonymized because they are all aggregated. So this really ensures the data protection. We are currently in the pilot phase and actually plan to go live in mid-2026, so rather soonish with that system. And it is actually developed in collaboration with a startup, TuneInsight, which did all the heavy lifting on the front end and also all the privacy preserving technology, which is in the background, which I can talk about in the next slide, next talk. And I think with that, I think there's lots of people involved at the hospitals, at SPHN, and I think, yeah, big thank you to everyone and to everyone who is not on the slide and contributed to that big endeavor.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for this nice overview. We got already quite a number of questions in the chat during your presentation. So I think we just go to the questions directly. The first question was from Olivier Niederhauser. He asked, who provided the SNOMED-CT codes to your dataset?
Yeah, so this is actually done by the local data teams. So again, we see here, so sometimes actually SNOMED-CT is already integrated now in the clinical systems in hospitals which were very advanced. We have other hospitals which code on the level of the clinical data platforms. And then also there is some hospitals or some value set, for example, where the coding more or less happens as a mapping in the pipeline towards SPHN. So again, it's very diverse, also very different from hospital to hospital and for also the topics. But it's always on the hospital side. So we never see the data. We only saw this metadata, which I showed you.
Excellent. I think you already answered also the question from Maximilian Kurscheid, who has asked, is the SNOMED coding done in the primary documentation or in the SPHN connector pipeline? So it depends on the type of data and the systems. So there was another question. about the triple in the triple store. What are the triples? What are the three components of the triples?
I wanted to spare you the RDF part, but then in a graph structure, our smallest element is a triple, meaning a subject, a predicate, and an object. And this kind of everything is broken down into these triplets, and these are the triplets we are counting. And this is very special to the kind of graph structure compared to a relational database. So actually what I'm always saying is triples does not one-to-one translate to data elements, because there's also triples which represent something of the structure or of SNOMED-CT. That's why I'm always putting the triples for correctness, because I think we cannot say data points, unfortunately.
Sabine, can you give me an example? I'm still struggling. So it's sorry, what did you say? A subject,
predicate, object.
A subject is what? A patient? No.
Yeah, SPHN is observation. So for example, a heart rate has a patient. That is one triple. And then for example,
so sorry, heart rate
has is the predicate, and then the patient. And then, for example, the diagnosis has a patient. And it's the same instant of the patient. So this is where the two triples would then go together, and you would, it's just that it's the other way around in our model. But then you, for example, also have a triplet for saying that the heart rate is an RDF class, because you need to say what is a class and what is a predicate. And these are these support triples, which I meant, which we cannot count as data elements. But Tim, I can give you an RDF introduction at some point.
I'm still lost. Okay. Can you, it'd be really grateful if you could email me some examples.
Yeah.
An RDF?
Research Description Framework.
Okay.
This is actually one of the formats for representing knowledge graph.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So there was another question from Dennis Kadioglu. How many projects have been run so far based on this data set?
Also that data set exists since December, so none at the moment. However, as I said, we approached the thing from the other way around. The first thing what we did were projects, and now we said, okay, let's represent what is there in the hospital. So meaning that a lot of the data, which is now in this federated data set, was shared as, for example, part of our NDSs or demonstrators. But
is it currently possible already through some kind of portal to apply for some type of data for a particular project, or how is the situation then now or planned for 2026 in the future?
Unfortunately, no portal yet. And I think that was very important for our hospitals, that the hospitals have their own processes, which also slightly differs between the hospitals. So currently on the metadata catalog, there is at least a kind of contact information where you can reach out and the access conditions, but then you have to go through each hospital's individual processes, and they can unfortunately also differ.
So no joint contractual situation or something like this?
Not for that data set, but this is definitely something which we should put on the agenda as one of the next steps.
That's a timely process if you want to have some data and you have to negotiate with every hospital and that stuff.
Yes.
Okay, we have two more questions, and I think so we are running out of time, but we can still go through those two questions. Maximilian Kurschat.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. My question would be, when data should be then brought together and basically shared, are there processes already defined for that, or are there technical interfaces defined for that data exchange and bringing the data together, or is that planned for future steps where it goes on top of the metadata analysis?
Yeah. So we have different steps, but unfortunately there's still some gaps in the overall process. So I think currently it's mostly when sharing that data, the data is prepared by the hospitals, and normally also there's quite an additional layer of quality control being done, and also it's really normally specifically prepared for the project. We then actually have templates for these contractual frameworks. So at least also these are templates which all the legal institutions in Switzerland have agreed to, so that actually this negotiation goes easier. But as you all know, each project has their own kind of specificities to put into the contract, and this is then again where negotiation start. So this is actually what is currently being done, and I think we are really working together with the hospitals also if we can streamline this export now from also that database more, but this is something to come in the future.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Thank you very much.
So our last question again from Tim Freiling from Geneva now.
Yes, firstly to say, guys, what you've done is fantastic. I'm a huge fan. We can't do this. I don't think this kind of federated metadata and the analysis that Biomed IT allows us to do, the Biomed IT nodes allow us to do, has been done anywhere else in the world in quite this way. UK has UK Biobank, but that's a static study that links those individuals to their data. But in terms of linking data from across hospitals like this, I don't think it's been done elsewhere. Anyway, my question was about the ability to query the metadata. Just to be clear on the Sparkle queries, to what level of granularity can you query data and do your cross-tab? Presumably you can do cross-tabulations, like the number of males with diabetes, a diabetes code, for example. But presumably if you start doing too many parameters, you get down to too small a number of individuals. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's, I think, on the metadata level, you can't do any combinatoric. So you would know that there's so many males, so many females, so many diabetes, but you cannot do any combination. This is what we will do with the so-called Data Explorer. So this will be this interface on top, and there we will actually have a huge bunch of privacy-preserving methods on top. You are only allowed to do a certain amount of queries. As soon as your values go below 10, you actually will only get the results under 10. You will have certain blurring. And as I say, there will be also with each institution like contracts to really ensure that all the safety and everything is secured. But then there you will be able to do this combinatoric, like female patient with diabetes which got a certain medication. But as I say, this is on the query system. On the metadata, as I say, it's really only static things, because there we can control the security. And also there, if counts are below 10, actually they are not even on the count level, not even indicated. For example, for SNOMED codes which are below 10, it will only tell you below 10, not even there the numbers.
Okay. But you could query averages for values. So you could take average, I think you showed an example of a mean value of something. Was that mean?
On the query system, yes. On the metadata, as I say, it's only code frequency or concept frequency.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then the detailed analysis, where you actually go and do your analysis, that's where you would work in the Biomed IT node after all the appropriate governance work.
So the query system will be, as I said, a federated one where via a web portal you can query the local hospital. But then if you really want to do a project and also have the scientific integrity that you also check the basis of your data, then you will get this data exported to Biomed IT and then do the analysis. So the query system is really for data exploration and project planning, first hypothesis testing.
So you see the data. So the data exploration has got two components. The first, what you've just described. Well,
the feasibility, so how many patients, and then you can do, for example, value distribution, mean averages, so first kind of explorative analysis.
In the Data Explorer.
Yeah.
And then to do your detailed analysis, you would need to set up a Biomed IT project.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Do we have time for the last question or?
Maximilian, eine kurze, short question.
Yeah, really short. So how are you distributing the feasibility queries in the SPHN? Is that like a centralized system, or is it a federalized, decentralized system?
So it's a federated system. So more or less each hospital has this database, our triple store, which has that Sparkle endpoint, meaning that can actually get the different sparkles. And then actually we have this system from the startup on top, which actually does all the privacy preserving methods, and also then actually aggregates the results across the different hospitals in a privacy preserving way. So that
Okay.
this is, and then actually in the you have a web portal where you would then actually see the result as a user. But it is really like a executed Sparkle query at each of the local databases.
Okay, and these Sparkle endpoints are basically exposed to the outside, and from the Data Explorer it can be queried, or is that Sparkle query distributed?
No, the local databases are only exposed to this local instance, which does the computation from TuneIn side and all the privacy, and these ones are then connected to the outside. So normally we go through with that system to 3 or 4 firewall zones of the hospitals, which is one of the challenges we are having, because the database sits, of course, very close to the clinical data platform, to the real data, even though it has only pseudonymized data. But then actually, we need to make sure that the aggregation happens already within the hospital, and then the aggregation of the patient level data, and then the aggregation across the site. So there's multiple aggregation levels.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we have that similar issue and challenges in the medical informatics initiative as well. And yeah, that's why I was interested in how you solve that. So if you're interested in exchange, it would be really great for me.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much, Sabine. So I think a lot of stuff and a lot of basic information. Thank you very much, but also a lot of stuff to discuss and exchange further. So we should stay in contact. So
definitely.
Ja. So, für den nächsten Vortrag in einer Woche werden wir uns wieder auf einen etwas lokaleren Bereich zurückziehen. Wir werden aus dem Datenintegrationszentrum in Münster einen Vortrag hören von Michael Stark, dem dortigen DITS-Leiter, über die DITS-Unterstützung für klinische Studien und den Einsatz von Patient-Reported Outcomes. Bis nächste Woche dann. Allen auch eine schöne Woche und bis bald. Ciao.